One of the qualities of the goddess Brigid or Brigid is that of storytelling. And storytelling includes our written and oral stories. And stories are very important to us as a people and for women especially. It's one of the ways that we communicate and share our experiences. And in today's world, we have so many mediums and platforms and ways that we can share our stories without having to go through the patriarchy's gatekeeping that has traditionally stifled our voices. In this episode, I'll talk about the importance of stories, and especially our stories as women, some of the different ways that we can share our stories. So I hope you join me in this episode about the sacredness of storytelling. Welcome. Dancing with the Goddess is how we move through and experience life as modern mystic women. I believe anyone can be a modern mystic woman and experience awe, beauty, and magic in our daily lives. I'm Tora Arish-Naimun, goddess mystic, author, and creative. Join me as we discover who we are meant to be, explore different modalities for self-improvement and transformation, and reawaken to our goddess magic and feminine divine selves. I invite you to dance with the goddess with me. Here's today's episode. Stories are an important and integral part of humanity. It's one of the things that distinguishes us from animals, at least that we're aware of, is our ability to share stories, to share our experiences through our language and through our verbal communications. Women's voices, our stories, have been stifled. We've been told to hush, to be quiet for so many years. But our voices are important. Our stories are important, my sister. Your story is important, and we need to hear it. Our stories, our wisdom, our experiences, and us coming together as a community is how we can, as women, change the world. It's how we can end the rule of patriarchy and its violence and its greed and injustice and imbalance. We can do that by connecting with other women, and we connect with other women through our stories, whether those are our written stories or our oral stories. And we know that stories are very important for our children's development. We start reading, or most of us do, start reading stories to our children even when they're infants. Some of us may read stories while we're still pregnant to our children, knowing that they can hear our voices. Stories is how children learn expected behavior. I love the new stories that are coming out, the diversity stories, the stories that help teach children about people of color or other cultures or those who have disabilities or have parents that are different than theirs. My grandchildren are 3 and 5, and my daughter, thankfully, is very aware of making sure that her children are reading and seeing these stories that represent a wide variety of people. As we teach our children this is where the end of racism starts, is showing our children when they're babies, when they're little, when they're toddlers, when they don't know the difference. They haven't really been exposed to it because they're still isolated in our family. If we're sharing those stories written by people of color, especially women of color, if we're sharing those stories of diversity and highlighting differences, then our children are growing up in a place where they don't see racism. They're being taught to be open-minded, to be welcoming of everyone. And this is a really good thing. There's a story that my daughter has that I cannot read without crying. Cannot read it to my granddaughter or my grandson without crying. And it's a story about a little Black girl who is very, very dark. And even in Africa, she lives in Africa, and even in Africa, she feels different because her skin is so dark and she wants to lighten it up. And the whole story is about her accepting herself and the beauty that is herself. And that's a beautiful story. And it not only helps teach my granddaughter to look at children and people of color and see their beauty, but it's helping her look at herself and appreciate herself. This is the importance of stories. It is now being surmised that language was developed in our ancient ancestors. We're talking Neanderthal, post-Neanderthal, the early humans. That language developed by women. Most of the hunters, we now know, not all, were men. They didn't need verbal communication. In fact, that was a detriment to their hunting success. They needed to be quiet and to communicate with gestures. However, the women who were gathering, taking care of the children, ensuring the survival of the community and living in a community environment needed more than just gestures to communicate more effectively, and created language, the spoken word. And almost immediately, we started telling stories. We sat around by the communal campfire and told stories. We told stories about our hunting. We told stories about where to go to get this plant, how to do this. We told stories about how to live in our societies. What was acceptable behavior? What wasn't? What were the consequences when you didn't follow the community's guidelines and were greedy, or when you didn't do those things that helped ensure the survival of the tribe, of the group? Those started almost immediately. And I'm a writer. If you listen to the intro, I'm a goddess mystic, author, and creative, and I write fantasy. Several years ago, I attended a writer's conference, and one of the professors that was giving a presentation was talking about how in his study and in other studies that they've linked now that stories were place and time specific. When people moved from one place to another before they settled in cities, they had certain stories that they would tell at certain places. He did a lot of study with Native Americans, and he even connected it with the Hebrew stories found in the Bible, that those stories were told at certain places at certain times. They would go by the constellations and travel to specific places and tell those specific stories. And those stories helped that continuation of the society, of the tribe. You wouldn't be telling a winter solstice story on summer solstice. One of the ways that our ancient ancestors told time was through seasons. They would wait to tell that story when it was season appropriate, when it was time appropriate. The stories that we tell our children also teach them about our family, about our lineage. Now, if you have had contact with any elderly person, my parents are in their 90s. They're still alive. My mom's almost 92, and my dad's almost 96. One of the things you will find with elderly people is they remember the past much clearer than they do the present. It's almost like they're in that transition period if they're not quite here, but they haven't fully transitioned to the next life, to the mother's womb, and they remember their past. And they're telling their stories of their childhood, of their teenage years, of when they met and got married over and over and over again. That is one way that we can learn about our lineage, that we can learn about our family history. Because when they're talking about their childhood, they're talking about their mother or their grandmother. If you're talking to your grandparents, it would be your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents even. That's a lot of generations. That's a lot of years. That can show us how much we've changed as a society. I listen to my parents and I can see not only technologically how we have changed as a society, but how our beliefs have grown, how our perceptions have grown. My parents were children of the Depression. They lived in rural Utah. They were fully adults when they encountered their first person of color. I remember meeting the first person of colors that I ever saw, and I was in junior high when that happened because I lived in Utah, which is homogeneously white. Now it isn't, which is awesome and great. When we're listening to those stories from our elders, that gives us clues on what we need to heal, what those generational traumas are that we can heal. Depending on your age, at my age, my parents, hell no, did they do any emotional intelligence healing or emotional or spiritual healing. That was no. You didn't even talk about if you had depression or anxiety. No, you didn't have that. So listening to that and what they experienced and what they denied and what they didn't heal can give us those clues of what we now can heal for our generations past and make sure that our generations going forward don't have to go through those same things. One of those that I've worked on is poverty. That's been a generational trauma in my family. I've healed a lot of trauma about women not being heard and seen and listened to. That's a generational trauma. That's a social trauma, and it's our generational trauma that by listening to those stories, we can heal. So my grandmother tells the story of how she got married her first time. She was a young teenager. She accompanied her sister who was getting married. They were just doing a justice of peace wedding. And the brother of the guy that she was marrying was there too. She barely knew him. He looked at her and said, like, so should we get married? That was his proposal. I think she met him on that trip. And they were married at the same time as her sister. No love involved. He was much, much older than she was. She did divorce him in the 30s, which was totally unheard of at the time, and moved to southern Utah where her mother was living. There was the St. George Temple, and they were Mormons. She met her second husband, which was my mother's stepfather, in the temple. That was common, still is common. And they hardly even dated. They met in the temple a few times. He was a widower. She was unmarried. She had 3 little girls. He had a little girl. They got married. I do believe they eventually fell in love, but she never did love her first husband. That's how things have changed. And that is generational trauma that I've had to heal because my first marriage, my one and only marriage that I never talk about, I settled. Most of my relationships, I settled for what was there. Like my grandmother settled. She took what was available. She didn't have a choice. She just settled. I broke that cycle for me. And I think I did for my daughter as well. That I don't settle. In fact, I would rather not be in any relationship than settle. I'm happier in no relationship than one where I've settled for, he's available. What can it hurt? Quite a bit, actually. Or telling stories. I'm telling a story right now of what I learned from my grandmother and what my experience was that and how I healed that. We tell stories to share our experiences. Not only do we tell stories to others, we tell stories to ourselves. We all have internal stories that we tell about ourselves and to ourselves. Pay attention to how you are talking about yourself. Would you say that about a friend? Would you allow a friend to talk about another friend the way you talk about yourself? I know for women, this is very common. I do it. I have a friend who frequently says, "Hey, don't talk about my friend like that," when I'm disparaging myself. How often do we tell ourselves the story that we're failures, that we can't do something, that we can't be a successful author, that every time we try doing something, we fail? How often do we say we can't do this, or I'm such a bad person? Man, that was just awful. I was awful. How often do you say that about yourself? How often do you tell those stories? I'm fat and ugly. That's a really big one for women, especially, is disparaging and telling ourselves the stories that we don't meet society's standard of beauty. And I do talk about healing and changing our body image in episode 12, if you'd like to go back and watch or listen to that. But we can change our internal stories, the stories we tell about ourselves and to ourselves. When we change those, we change our life. Because the stories that we're telling are subconscious beliefs. Our subconscious does not understand the difference between fiction and fact. If we're constantly saying, "I'm a failure," our conscious mind believes it. Especially when we're saying it with feeling. We're crying about it. We're sobbing about it. We're in so much of our feels, so much of our emotion. We're tired of being poor and we hate being in poverty and we wish we had more money. And we're crying and sobbing about that. We are so emotionally invested in that story. Our subconscious believes that story. And it works to make sure that we're living that story. In the law of attraction and with Abraham Hicks, she's always talking about telling the story of how you want your life to be. How's things going? It's going great. People are looking at your life and going, "How can you say that?" And you go, "Because I'm seeing what I want. I'm seeing where I want to be, not where I am right this moment." You're telling your subconscious a different story. It believes whatever you're telling it. It doesn't know the difference between fact and fiction. So if you're telling the story that you are a success, that you are successful, that you're prosperous, that your life is abundant and everything is just getting better and better and better, and you're doing that with emotion and you're emotionally invested in it, there's your key. You can't just say, "I am abundant." No, it's "I am abundant," and you're doing it with feeling. You have all those feels and all those emotions. Your subconscious believes it now. And now it's working to match up what you find in reality with what your story is. So telling yourself different stories is how you change your life, how you change the stories you've been telling, your internal stories. Affirmations are also a way of changing your story. You're saying that with feeling. You're imagining that happening. You're imagining that community of women that you want to build. You're imagining what that looks like, what that feels like, and just really being in that energy. You may not have that right this moment, but you're creating the energy and the vibration to bring that into your life. Another method that really helps to change your story is to write to yourself, write to your present self, as if from your future self. Pretend, imagine your future life, and write a story to your present self about what your life is like, what has changed, how you're living now, what you're doing now in that future life. And when you're reading that and getting those feels about how amazing that is, you're telling a different internal story to your subconscious mind. And it's going to work to make that happen. When you're setting goals, that's what you're doing. You're telling your subconscious a future story. And your subconscious, because you believe you're going to meet that goal, things start falling in place so that you can meet that goal because you believe you're going to. If you don't believe you're going to meet that goal, there's no way in hell you are. Women's stories are important and valuable. They've been discounted and devalued and diminished, just like any other part of our women's work and our life experience. We talked about the devaluing of women's work in episode 15. If you'd like to go back, if you haven't listened to that or watched that yet. Our stories have also been devalued, diminished, demeaned, that our life experiences aren't valuable. The stories women write have never been seen as valuable as the stories that men write. Once publishing hit, very common for women to use a male pseudonym in order to get their stories even published. If they were writing under a woman's name, their stories wouldn't get published. I'm an author, I write fantasy. In the fantasy world, J.K. Tolkien is touted as the master of fantasy. He's retelling Beowulf, and it's a fucking boring story. I don't like Tolkien. I don't like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or anything that he's written. It's boring and totally doesn't appeal to me because there are no women characters. There's more characters in the movie than there are in the books, which made the movies tolerable. They discount, in the fantasy world, the works of Anne McCaffrey with the Dragon Riders of Pern. Dragon stories started with her. We see it as fantasy, but it's really a science fiction. If you get into the later stories and how the dragons were created, it's a science fiction story. Ursula Le Guin, a pioneer in fantasy that quite often gets discounted. And she's a pioneer in feminism. Andre Norton, Mercedes Lackey. All of these really incredible women writers have been discounted, and all we hear about is Tolkien and J.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson. I've never read Sanderson, Rothfuss. Started reading Game of Thrones and no, I don't like the misogyny in it. Couldn't read it. Women tend to write romance, comedies. Those are stories that are completely discounted in the publishing world. Even though romance stories and the romance genre is huge, it's discounted as not real writing. Most books by women are discounted as not real writing because it's the way that we tell our stories. A lot of women couldn't get published because of the patriarchy gatekeeping of agents and publishing houses. That changed in 2009. We have had a complete revolution in the publishing industry since the advent of indie publishing and electronic books. I'm an indie author. I have no desire to go the traditional route. It isn't because I don't think my stories are good enough, and that's a misconception that a lot of people have, is that independent stories are not as good as traditionally published ones. Read some books. There's some really awful books that have been published. It was just what the gatekeepers thought would sell. The stories women tell and the stories women write are different from the ones men write. And they've been traditionally held back, that we haven't been able to get these amazing stories by women until indie publishing. And this has really brought out into the forefront how important our voices are, how important our stories are, because they are so different from men. We have different lived experiences. We see the world differently. And so our stories, of course, are going to be told differently. We need more stories from women. Your story is important. And I'm not talking just about you writing a story. I'm coming from it as a writer. I'm telling a story here. We can tell those stories in other mediums now. When we share our stories and have that courage, because it takes a lot of courage to share our stories in a public setting. It's a key place for us awakening to our feminine divine presence and being in our feminine divine presence and embodying that. We can read, watch, listen to stories by other women. We can make sure to expand our horizons and read, watch, listen to stories by women who don't look like us, women of color, or if you are a woman of color, read white women's stories. Read stories about disability, about other sexual orientations. Reading these different stories broadens our perspectives and broadens our horizon. And with these new mediums, we now have those stories available to us. We can seek out and find those stories by women of color, by other minorities, by women who are LGBTQIA plus communities, by women who have disabilities, who are neurodivergent. All of that is now available that we didn't have in my own lifetime. This has been a revolutionary thing that has happened since 2009. Facebook started right around 2008, 2009, maybe a little earlier. Independent publishing started at the same time. Don't think it's a coincidence. The goddess and feminine divine is rising into the forefront in that place of community and sharing our stories. Sharing our stories is a way to connect to other women, bypassing the patriarchy's bullshit that says women can't be friends, that women are catty. They are if they're still in the patriarchy mindset and belief system. But when you are in your feminine divine, we connect through our stories and realize how amazing feminine friendships are and how much we need that community because we are stronger in community. The lie of women can't be friends is one of the ways that patriarchy has separated us and kept us isolated from other women, from where we have our power source. And seeing our stories being reflected in other people on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and in podcasts and in books, we're seeing how connected we are. We're finding our community of women again. And it's such an amazing thing to experience. For those in the younger generations, you don't know how lucky you are. I'm an elder Gen Xer. I've experienced this change in my lifetime. In our modern era, we are so lucky that there are so many mediums and platforms for us to share our story. We have the social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, where we can freely, mostly freely, share our stories. And this is what's scaring the patriarchy so much, is because women are sharing their stories, especially on TikTok, where we're seeing our story reflected in other women across the spectrum, and that we realize we're not alone, that we can empower each other through supporting each other. With the creation of indie publishing, we can now read and listen to stories by other women without them having to hide behind a male pseudonym. The stories that I read, 95% or more, are by women by choice. I seek out other women writers. I like the stories women tell and write. I've tried to read stories recently by other men. I know other men authors in my genre. I have a hard time reading their stories because they're not speaking and representing me. They're not speaking to me as a woman. They may be really good stories, but I don't see myself in them. But the stories that women write, I can recognize me in them. So I understand how important having representation in story is, not only as a woman, but we need to find that representation in the broader spectrum of women of color and other minorities and the neurodivergent, other sexual orientations, and the whole broad spectrum that we're now able to see and to hear because of these new mediums. We have electronic books. It's not just printed anymore. I, as an author, can write a book and get it to you fairly quickly and professionally. My indie books are just as professionally produced as a traditionally published one. I take care to produce my books as professionally and to the best quality that I am capable of doing, which is quite high. So indie published books are by no means lesser quality than traditionally published books. One of the big differences, like I've harped on already, is more voices can be heard through indie published books because there isn't that patriarchal gatekeeping that happens with traditional publishing. It doesn't happen with indie publishing. Anybody can share their story. Indie publishing includes this medium right here of podcasting. Anybody can record and share their story through audio podcasting, or I also do this video, so video and audio podcasting. I'm sharing my story that I couldn't have done 10 years ago. we have this opening of sharing our stories through these new mediums, and more mediums are being developed, and it's amazing to be part of this. Blogs, sometimes think of blogs as old news. They're amazing that we're able to share our thoughts, our personal essays, even our stories through blogs and on our own website that isn't gate kept by somebody else. We're not having to submit our article to a magazine, to an editor, to, oh, check, it's okay to publish this. No, we can publish our stories, our thoughts, and people can find it. It's amazing that audiobooks, that for people who don't like to read or who are busy, can listen to stories. And don't give me the bullshit that an audiobook is not a book. It's the same fucking thing. How do you learn to read? You learn to read through listening to story. We read stories to our children. Is that not a valid book that we're reading to our children? They're still getting the story. Only auditory. It's valid. Audiobooks are just as valid as printed books. Some people prefer and learn auditory. Some people prefer and learn through reading. It's amazing that I, as an author now, can provide my content in many different formats to meet the needs of my audience. I can have an audiobook. I can have a printed book. I can have an ebook. I can have a podcast that's both audio and visual. And if you go onto my website, you can get a transcript. And I have on my website the audio. So if you want to listen and read at the same time, you can on my website. You don't need Apple's new transcript service to do that. You can go onto my website and do that. A lot of podcasts have their transcripts on their website. And this keeps our intellectual property. My podcast is my intellectual property. With Apple wanting to now create a transcript via AI, they're stealing my intellectual property. I will be adding and uploading my own transcripts because I like things correct, and AI never, ever, ever gets my name correct. Tor Arishne. Moon. You would not believe what it comes up with. Even Torah Moon. Woo! AI never gets that correct. The names of goddesses are never correct through the AI. Soapbox there. I do use AI for certain things, but not for creation or for writing. That's all coming from me. Since this is getting a bit long, I'm going to split this episode into two parts. This is part one of the importance of story. In part two, we're going to talk about the differences between how women and men tell stories and the paradigm shift that is happening. That will be next week's episode, so I hope you stay tuned for that. Women perceive the world differently than men. For the most part, it's more holistic. We see that art of connection. And that's one of the ways that we use story, is to connect with each other. I invite you to explore the different mediums of your story. You don't have to write a book or write a story to share your story. You can if you want, but you can share your stories through TikTok videos, through Instagram Reels. You can share that in your Facebook or other social media posts. You can share your stories in your blog. You can start a podcast. Not that expensive. You can be sharing your story in YouTube videos. The world needs to hear your story, my sister. don't hide it. I highly encourage you to start sharing your story in a way that works for you. If it's through writing, do it that way. If it's through speaking, such as a podcast, do it that way. If it's through the visual medium of video, do that. But don't hide your story. We need to hear your story so that we can connect with you. You have wisdom to share. Your life experience is valuable. Your voice, your story needs to be heard and shared. It's how we can connect as a community and how we can change the world. We can end patriarchy through sharing our stories as women, through connecting in a community as women. And I do have a community for you to connect. I have a Facebook community if you want to just test up the waters and connect with the Dancing with the Goddess Sisterhood through Facebook community. And I will put a link to that in the show notes. And I also have a paid community on Circle, which is a monthly membership where we can go in deeper conversations and connect more deeply than you can on Facebook. Let's face it, Facebook, you don't always see the posts. You've got to play Facebook's games at everyone so that your people in your group who want to hear your information and share with others in that community actually see it. There's that patriarchal gatekeeping. There are other mediums. Circle is one. That's why I have a paid membership on Circle, is so that there is no patriarchy gatekeeping there. It's just us. We can talk about whatever we want and it stays private and we can see it all. We can connect. And the information for that is also in the show notes. That's the Dancing with the Goddess Sisterhood. My sister, we need your story. What story do you have to share? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode and it deepened your dance with the goddess. Please subscribe to our channel, like and share the video, and feel free to comment. This helps more women find our show. To support the show, please donate to buymeacoffee.com DWGpod. Your donations help support the cost of hosting, editing, and production of the podcast. We appreciate your support. May the rest of your day be amazing, and may you dance with the goddess in love and joy.